A rainy October evening enveloped the Modern Vision Gallery in a soft twilight. Raindrops drummed on the glass roof of the atrium, creating a whimsical melody. Ava Pierce fixed her impeccably styled brown hair and once again checked the arrangement of the new exhibits. It was an hour before closing time, and she wasn't expecting visitors. The sound of the door opening made her turn around. A tall man in an expensive dark gray suit entered the gallery. Water dripped from his coat, forming puddles on the perfectly waxed parquet. The stranger looked around the room with an appraising gaze and headed toward the abstract composition that occupied the center wall. "Good evening." Ava approached the visitor, noting his correct facial features and attentive brown eyes. "May I help you?" "Torrance Blackwood," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "Looking for something special for my office. Tired of the typical landscapes and still lifes." His handshake was firm and confident. Ava smelled the light scent of expensive perfume. "You're in luck, Mr. Blackwood. We just got a new collection of James Hawthorne's work. His vision of the urban landscape is quite unique." They moved slowly from painting to painting. Ava talked about the artist's technique, his philosophy, and the influence of European expressionism. Torrance listened intently, asking unexpectedly insightful questions, revealing a good knowledge of art history. "You surprise me," Ava smiled. "Most clients are only interested in sizes and prices. Financial analytics is my job, but art is a long-time passion." He paused in front of a large canvas in red and black colors. "This work, there's something hypnotic about it." "Shadow Dance," Ava nodded. "One of Hawthorne's last works. The artist painted it after visiting Tokyo's Shibuya neighborhood at night, the play of neon lights in the rainy darkness." Torrance turned to her, and their gazes met. Something flashed between them, that elusive attraction that couldn't be explained in words. "I'll take her," he pronounced, without averting his eyes. "But I may need some advice on decorating and lighting." Ava pulled out the gallery's business card and held it out to him. Their fingers touched for a moment. "Here's a business phone number. I'd be happy to help." Torrance smiled and wrote his information and phone number into the paperwork. As he walked away, Ava caught her reflection in the glass, flushed cheeks, glistening eyes. She shook her head, pushing the unwelcome thoughts away. Just another customer, just another ordinary evening at the gallery. But somewhere in the back of her mind she already knew that wasn't true. The old Victorian mansion of the Blackwood family stood on the hill like a silent guardian of tradition. Torrance parked his Lexus in the gravel driveway. Sunday lunches at his parents' house were an unshakable ritual from which neither work, weather, nor personal plans exempted him. Martha Blackwood, impeccable as ever in her austere knee-length dress, met her son at the door. "You're 10 minutes late, dear. Father is already in the dining room." George Blackwood sat at the head of the massive oak table, reading his Bible. He barely looked up when his son entered the room. "I hope the reason for being late is good enough. Traffic on the highway, Father." Torrance took his customary seat to the right of the head of the household. Nothing had changed here in years. The same heavy drapes, the family portraits on the walls, the monogrammed silverware. "Let's pray," George said, closing the Bible. The family bowed their heads. "God Almighty, we thank you for the food on this table and for the opportunity to gather as a family." Torrance repeated the words familiar from his childhood, but his thoughts wandered far away. Ava's face was in front of his eyes, her graceful movements as she talked about the paintings. "Son," his mother's voice brought him back to reality. "Did you hear that the Petersons' daughter is getting married?" "Good for her," Torrance murmured, setting the baked potato down. "You're 30, Torrance." George cut off a piece of roast with surgical precision. "It's time to think about procreation. The church is a fine place to meet a decent girl. I have a career, Father, and I meet a lot of interesting people at work." "Interesting?" Martha tightened her lips. "I hope you remember our values. There are so many temptations." Torrance remembered his childhood. Endless Sunday services, summer religious camps, punishments for the slightest transgression. His father's strictness, his mother's silent disapproval, the stifling atmosphere of righteousness. "I remember, Mother." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At the same time, across town, in a cozy apartment overlooking the park, Ava sat snuggled up with a large mug of tea. Zoe Larson, her best friend since college, sat across from her. And he just went ahead and bought the painting? Just like that? Zoe pulled her knees up to her chest, getting more comfortable on the couch. Can you believe it? $40,000? Without even haggling. Ava still couldn't believe what had happened. But it's not about the money. He's different, educated, interesting, and attractive as hell, judging by your description, Zoe winked. But you do realize... Ava set the mug down on the table. I do, as always. Hey! Zoe moved closer, putting her arm around her friend's shoulders. You've come such a long way. Remember when we met? You were still a... I remember, Ava replied quietly. A scared freshman Aiden, who was afraid of his own shadow. Now look at you. A successful, beautiful woman. You deserve to be happy, sweetheart. Just be careful. Ava clung to her friend. Zoe had been there for her since the early days of her transformation, supporting her during hormone therapy, helping her pick out clothes, protecting her from leering looks and evil tongues. You know what the scariest part is? Ava whispered. For the first time in a long time, I felt that spark. When he looked at me, I was just me. Not a transgender woman, not an ex-boyfriend, just me. You'll have to tell him, Zoe said softly. I know, but not right now. Give me some time to just be happy. The two friends sat in a cozy silence, each thinking about her own thoughts, Zoe about how to protect the man she cared about from the new pain Ava was in, about the brown eyes and warm smile of the man who would either accept her for who she was or break her heart. And in the Blackwood mansion, Torrance stared at his reflection in the polished silverware and thought of the beautiful gallery owner, unaware that soon his world would be turned upside down and he would have to choose between what he had believed all his life and what he was beginning to feel. Le Petit Jardin was considered one of the most romantic places in town. The French Café, tucked away in a quiet alleyway, was famous for its old Paris atmosphere, wrought iron tables, the soft light of vintage lamps, fresh flowers in copper vases. Ava arrived 15 minutes early. She chose a table in the corner that overlooked the street. She nervously adjusted the folds of the emerald dress she and Zoe had picked out the day before. The green emphasizes your eyes, her friend had said, and Ava hoped Torrance would notice. He showed up exactly at the appointed time, this time without the business suit, in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that made him seem more approachable, human. Ava felt her pulse quicken as he approached the table. You look beautiful. Torrance leaned over and touched her cheek lightly with his lips. He smelled of sandalwood and the fall wind. Thank you, she rejoiced in the dim lighting that hid the blush. You too. The waiter brought a menu and they ordered wine, red for him, white for her. The conversation flowed easily and casually, as if they'd known each other for years. So you always wanted to be a financier? Ava took a sip of wine. Actually, when I was a kid, I dreamed of being an artist, Torrance chuckled. But my father quickly knocked that notion out of my head. Blackwoods don't do frivolous things. And now you're buying paintings for the office. A small act of rebellion, he said the last word in French, and it sounded surprisingly graceful. And you? Always loved art? Ava froze for a moment. Questions about the past were always difficult. Yes, but the path to it was challenging. You know, sometimes you have to fight for the right to be yourself. That feels familiar. Torrance covered her hand with his. His palm was warm and secure. Though my battles probably don't compare to yours. Everyone has their own demons, she replied quietly, fighting the urge to confess right now. But the fear of losing it, the warmth of his hand, the sincerity of his gaze, the budding closeness, was stronger. They talked about books. It turned out they both read Marquez. About music. He played the piano. She loved jazz. About traveling. She dreamed of seeing Venice. He suggested they go together next spring. Next spring? Ava interjected. You're planning that far ahead? Why not? His eyes radiated warmth. I feel like it's okay to make plans with you. Her insides clenched. Torrance, there's something I have to tell you. Shh. He put a finger to her lips. Let's just savor the moment. Whatever you want to say, It can wait. The evening slowly drifted into night. They were the last customers in the cafe. The waiters rattled their dishes delicately, hinting at closing time. At the door, Torrance helped her into her coat. His hands lingered on her shoulders a little longer than necessary. "Will you let me walk you out?" They walked down the deserted streets, and Ava's heels beat a clear rhythm on the sidewalk. At the corner of her house, Torrance stopped and turned her toward him. "It was a lovely evening," he whispered and leaned toward her. The kiss was light, almost weightless, like the first snow, like the touch of butterfly wings. But in that weightlessness lurked the promise of more. "Good night, Ava." As she climbed back up to her room, she could feel the panic growing inside. She was falling in love. God. She was really falling in love with him, which meant a confession was becoming inevitable, and either it would ruin everything, or... Ava couldn't bring herself to consider the second possibility. The hope was too painful. In the darkness of the apartment, she stood at the window for a long time, looking at Torrance's receding figure. He turned around and waved at her. She waved back, feeling a tear roll down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "Please forgive me for still being afraid to be honest." October changed to November, bringing chilly winds and early twilight. For Ava and Torrance, it was a month of meetings. In museums, theaters, cozy restaurants. Each date deepened their bond, and each made the confession all the more frightening. "You have to tell him," Zoe repeated for the 100th time, pacing around Ava's apartment. "The longer you procrastinate, the worse it's going to get." "I'm trying." Ava sat on the windowsill, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Really trying. Yesterday at the opera." She remembered them listening to Madame Butterfly. The story of a woman living a lie echoed painfully in her. At intermission, she started a conversation about acceptance and understanding, about how appearances can deceive. Torrance nodded, said the right words about tolerance, but didn't understand. "He doesn't see hints, Ava." Zoe took a seat next to her friend. "Men in general rarely see them, and Torrance is from a very conservative family besides. You have to be blunt about it." "And lose him?" Ava's voice trembled. "You don't see the way he looks at me. No one's ever looked at me like that." "What if he doesn't find out from you, if someone tells him? Or worse, if he discovers the truth at an intimate moment?" Ava shuddered. Their relationship was becoming more and more intimate. Torrance was gentle, patient, not rushing things, but she could feel his growing desire, saw it in his eyes, felt it in his touch. Last night, as they kissed in his car, his hand slid up her thigh higher than usual. She pulled away, citing a headache. The disappointment in his gaze was unbearable. "I can't lose him," Ava whispered. "I just can't." At that moment, her phone rang. Torrance. "Hey, beautiful, would you like to go for a walk? The first snow has fallen." She agreed, of course. They met at the park. It was really snowing, in large, fluffy flakes, turning the city into a fairy tale. Torrance bought them hot chocolate, and they wandered through the snow-covered alleys. "You know," he said when they stopped at a frozen fountain, "I never believed in love at first sight. Thought it was the stuff of romantics and poets." Ava's heart skipped a beat. "And now?" "And now I realize I was wrong." He turned to her, brushed a snowflake off her cheek. "You've changed everything, Ava. All my ideas about life, about love, about the future." "Torrance." She took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know about me." "Whatever it is, it doesn't matter." He pulled her to him. "I love you, just the way you are." She hid her face against his chest so he couldn't see her tears. "You don't understand. Then explain." But she couldn't. Again she couldn't. Instead she kissed him, putting all her pain and fear and despair into the kiss. Later, at home, she took a long look at herself in the mirror. A beautiful woman with frightened eyes stared back. Somewhere in a desk drawer were old photographs, Aiden as he had been before the transition. Sometimes she felt like that scared boy still lived inside her, reminding her of a past that couldn't be erased. The phone jingled with a message from Torrance. "You're amazing. I want you to meet my parents. This weekend?" Ava sank to the floor, clutching the phone to her chest. Fear came over her in a suffocating wave. Meeting her parents. Dinner at a house where the Bible was law. How long could she keep up this act? And what would be the cost of the final act? "I'll think about it," she texted back and turned off her phone. She lay awake that night, imagining all the possible confession scenarios and their consequences. Each one ended the same way: the loss of the man she'd come to love more than life. Ava's apartment was in semi-darkness. She had lit dozens of candles, placing them around the perimeter of the living room. Their flickering light reflected in the tall windows, transforming the room into a mysterious space where reality mingled with illusion. On the table, a bottle of red wine, 2 glasses, and a few Italian dishes ordered from her favorite restaurant were waiting to be served. Ava checked her reflection in the mirror one last time. Her dark blue dress emphasized her slender figure, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. Tonight. It had to be tonight. The ringing of the doorbell made her flinch. Torrance stood on the doorstep with a bouquet of white roses. "You're beautiful," he whispered, kissing her cheek. He smelled of expensive perfume and a cool December evening. Dinner passed in an almost painful tension. Ava barely touched her food, answering offhandedly. Torrance asked several times if everything was all right. She nodded, but could see the worry in his eyes. "Shall we dance?" he suggested after dinner, turning on the music on his phone. A slow song filled the space. They twirled in the semi-darkness of the room. His arms around her waist were warm and secure. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent, realizing that this might be their last dance. "Torrance." "We need to talk." But instead of talking, his lips found hers. The kiss was deep, passionate. His hands slid down her body, caressing, exploring. She melted in his embrace, losing her resolve. "Let's go," he whispered, drawing her into the bedroom. Moonlight streamed through the uncurtained window, painting silvery patterns on the bed. Torrance unbuttoned the buttons of his shirt, never taking his darkened gaze from her. "Wait," Ava took a step back. "Please, hear me out. What do you want to talk about?" He took a step toward her, holding out his hand. "About who I am." His palm slid down her thigh, rising higher, and time stopped. Torrance jerked his hand away as if he'd been burned. "What? What is it?" "I was trying to say, are you a man?" His voice trailed off into a shout. "Torrance, let me explain." "Explain?" He recoiled against the wall. You monster! A deceiver!" Madness splashed in his eyes. He grabbed a gun from the inside pocket of his jacket hanging on the chair. A small, stealthy Glock, a weapon he'd bought on the black market after his neighbor had been robbed last year. "Torrance, please! Shut up! You've desecrated everything! My love, my faith!" The gunshot broke the silence of the December night. Ava didn't even immediately realize what had happened. She stared at the blurring red stain on her favorite blue dress with a kind of childlike wonder. "I just wanted to be me," she whispered, settling to the floor. Torrance stood unmoving, watching the life slowly leave the woman he loved. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled. A television turned on in the neighboring apartment. He mechanically wiped the gun with the edge of his shirt, placed it next to the body. He looked around. No sign of a struggle, no prints. Only the candles were still burning in the living room, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. Torrance left the apartment, closing the door carefully. The cameras in the entryway weren't working. The management company had promised to fix them weeks ago. He walked down the stairs, avoiding the elevator. The December air hit his face with icy freshness. Torrance walked, unable to make out the road, whispering prayers, but the words became confused and meaningless. Behind him, candles still burned in the lighted window on the 5th floor, mourning a love killed by prejudice and fear. Zoe rang the doorbell 3 times before pulling out the spare key. It was the beginning of 11 in the morning. Ava never slept that long, and always answered her messages. "Ava?" she called out, crossing the threshold. The apartment smelled of stale wax. Dozens of candles burned out to the ground. On the living room table stood untouched glasses and a nearly full bottle of wine. The white roses in the vase were already beginning to wilt. Something was wrong. Zoe felt it in her skin, even before she saw the bedroom door ajar. "Oh my God, no, no, no!" Ava was lying on the floor, arms spread out as if in a final embrace. The dark blue dress was blackened with blood. A gun lay nearby. Zoe didn't remember dialing 911. Her voice sounded strange, like a stranger's. "Murder. My friend. Please hurry." The detectives arrived 20 minutes after the patrolman. Merritt Holloway, a woman of about 45 with attentive gray eyes, went straight to the sobbing Zoe. Her partner, Fletcher Kane, a tall African-American man with a streak of gray in his short-cropped hair, began surveying the scene. "Tell me how you found the body," Holloway asked softly, taking a seat next to Zoe on the living room couch. She wasn't answering her cell phone, and last night was a big night. She was going to tell him everything. Tell who? Torrance, her boyfriend, about how she... Zoe stammered, that she's a transgender woman. Holloway glanced over to Kane, who was just coming out of the bedroom. "Found the victim's cell phone," he reported, showing a smartphone in a clear evidence bag. "Latest messages from one Torrance Blackwood. Last night at 7 p.m. On my way to your place. Bought your favorite white roses." "That's him," Zoe nodded. "Torrance Blackwood. They'd been dating for about 2 months. Ava was afraid to tell him the truth. He comes from a very religious family." "Forensics found evidence of dinner for two," Kane continued. "A gun with no prints. Judging by the position of the body and the nature of the wound, it was a point-blank shot." There was a knock on the door. The forensics team had arrived. Holloway turned to Zoe again. "We need to know everything about Torrance Blackwood. Where he works, lives, his habits. Also, did Ava have any enemies? Did anyone threaten her because of her identity?" "No, she was very careful. Worked at a contemporary art gallery. Everyone there knew and accepted her. And Torrance..." Zoe pulled out her phone, opened Instagram. "Here's his page. He's a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs." "Have the neighbors heard anything?" Kane asked a police officer interviewing the floor's tenants. "The woman in the apartment on the right says she heard a loud pop around midnight, but thought it was firecrackers. The youths often set them off in the yard." Holloway sighed and looked at the body the forensics team was preparing to transport. Another victim of hate and prejudice. She'd seen enough of these cases in her 20 years of service. "Check the security cameras," she ordered. "Already have. Not working for the last 2 weeks." "Of course," Holloway grinned crookedly. "Okay, canvass all the tenants of the house. Someone might have seen the suspect enter or leave. Miss Larson," she turned to Zoe, "we're going to need your help. You know more about their relationship than anyone else." Zoe nodded, looking at the white roses in the vase. Their petals had begun to fall, covering the table like snow, or a shroud. Detective Holloway's office resembled a military headquarters. The blackboard was mottled with photos, notes, and red threads of connections. Ava's photo in the center, Torrance Blackwood's on the right, and crime scene photos on the left. "So, what have we got?" Kane sipped his cooled coffee. It was early morning of the second 24 hours of the investigation. Victim is Ava Pierce, 23 years old, transgender female. Worked at a contemporary art gallery called Modern Vision. Colleagues describe her positively. No conflicts or threats. Holloway stepped up to the board. Prime suspect is Torrance Blackwood, 30 years old. Financial analyst, impeccable reputation. Comes from an influential religious family. Father is George Blackwood, a prominent conservative preacher. Did the interrogation yield anything? Nothing. Holloway tapped her pen irritably on the desk. Perfect alibi. Says he came to her place around 8 o'clock at night with flowers. Had dinner, she complained about being tired, and he left around 10. He was seen at the gym at 11, signed up for a night workout. Thoughtful. Too thoughtful? Listen to what his ex-secretary told me. 3 years ago, a transgendered man took a job in their office. Blackwood wrote a complaint to management, demanded he be fired, citing company morals. Kane whistled. Motive looms. But there's no evidence. Holloway rubbed her eyes tiredly. No prints on the gun. Ballistics tests show the gun isn't registered anywhere. No signs of a struggle. Is his DNA in the apartment? Of course it is. He was there regularly. There was a knock on the door. Zoe came in with a thick folder. I brought Ava's diaries. She placed the folder on the desk. She's kept them since the beginning of the transformation. The last entry, the day before she was killed. Holloway opened the last page. I have to tell him. Every time he looks at me with such love, I can feel the lies choking me. Zoe's right. The longer I procrastinate, the worse it will get. But I'm so afraid of losing him. God, I'm so afraid of... Now, this is interesting. Kane put the printouts on the table. Blackwood's bank statements. 3 weeks ago, he made a large cash withdrawal. The next day, there was an illegal gun sale in that neighborhood. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's something else. I talked to his gym roommate. That night, Blackwood actually came in at 11 o'clock. Sweating, even though it was about 0 outside. He hadn't worked out, just sat in the sauna for almost an hour. Covering up gunpowder residue? Quite possibly, but we can't prove it. But Holloway went back to the blackboard, studying the photographs. One showed Torrance smiling for the camera. Perfect suit, the confident look of a successful man. In another, he was coming out of church with his parents, prim and stern. We slowed down the search of his apartment, she said. He had time to get rid of anything that could link him to the murder. But here's the curious thing. His father suddenly canceled all Sunday sermons and flew to the Bahamas with his wife. Hiding a son? Or covering their tracks? I spoke to the congregation of their church. George Blackwood is known for his radical views on issues of gender and sexuality. His last sermon was about Sodom sin and perverting divine design. Zoe, who had been silently listening to their conversation all this time, spoke up. Ava said Torrance has been getting more nervous lately, especially after he talked about meeting his parents. She was dreading that meeting. And rightly so. Holloway nodded. But we still don't have direct evidence, only circumstantial evidence and motive. There's something else. Zoe pulled out her phone. Ava sent me a voicemail the night before the murder. I didn't listen to it right away. She turned on the recording. Ava's voice, excited and quiet. Zoe, I can't do this anymore. He was talking today about the wedding, about the kids. I'm going to tell him today. No matter what happens, I have to be honest. If he loves me, he'll understand, won't he? Holloway closed her eyes. How much hope there was in that voice. How much faith in love. We'll get him, she said firmly. Sooner or later, he'll make a mistake. They all do. In the meantime, he's out there, Zoe said bitterly. Going to work, smiling, living like nothing happened. Not for long, Holloway went to the window. Outside the glass, a frowning winter dawn was taking hold. The truth always comes out. It's just a question of timing. The 24-hour fitness club Olympus was located 3 blocks from the murder scene. Holloway and Kane got there early in the morning when the receptionist was just coming in for her shift. Yes, Mr. Blackwood came in that evening. The girl checked the visitor's log. Signed in at 23:05. Here's his signature. Holloway scrutinized the register. A sprawling signature, clearly made by a trembling hand. Next to it was a black gel pen with the club's logo on it. Can I take this pen in for examination? Sure, the receptionist shrugged. I just don't understand. Do you have cameras working? Kane interrupted. Yes. Would you like a tape? On the tape, Torrance appeared in the club's lobby without his gym bag, wearing the same clothes he'd worn during the day. His whole appearance betrayed extreme nervousness, disheveled hair, unbuttoned shirt collar. He fiddled with the signature for a long time, then hurried off in the direction of the sauna. How long was he in there? Holloway asked. About an hour. Then he left without even changing his clothes. 3 hours later, forensics confirmed gunpowder residue on the handle. He didn't think about the hands. Holloway nodded, satisfied. He was in a hurry to create an alibi, forgot about the little things. Kane placed the phone call printout in front of her. Look, at 23:20, he called his father. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. And the next day, the family flew to the Bahamas in a hurry. Holloway tapped her pencil on the desk thoughtfully. That's too many coincidences. There's something else. Kane turned on the video from the mall camera across the street from Ava's house. There he is, running out of the driveway at 23 sharp. See how he's looking back? The grainy footage showed a tall figure in a dark coat walking hurriedly down the street. looking around every now and then. Just enough time to run to the gym, Holloway estimated. Create an alibi, call my dad, and start covering our tracks, Kane finished. They looked at each other. The crime picture was coming together like a mosaic, piece by piece. Time to take it. Holloway rose from the table. Call the DA's office. Have them prepare an arrest warrant. You think he'll crack? We've got gunpowder residue, camera footage, odd behavior, calling his father and leaving the family in a hurry. Plus motive, religious fanaticism and transphobia. He'll crack. As they walked out into the parking lot, it was beginning to snow. White flakes fell slowly to the ground, hiding footprints just like the night Torrance Blackwood had tried to cover up the evidence of his crime. But some traces could not be hidden by snow. Holloway's phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from the experts. They found not only gunpowder residue on the pen, but also blood particles, microscopic, almost imperceptible. But they were there, the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. The interrogation room greeted Torrance Blackwood with its usual sterile emptiness. He sat upright, impeccably dressed as always, neatly pressed suit, polished shoes, neatly styled hair. Only his fingers tapping nervously on the desk gave away his state of mind. Holloway leisurely laid out the photographs in front of him. Do you recognize this pen, Mr. Blackwood? Just a regular gym pen, he shrugged. I already told you I was there that night. Interesting thing about gunpowder, Holloway remarked, as if by the way. It's an intractable one. It's hard to wash it off completely, especially if you're in a hurry. Torrance's fingers trembled, but his face remained impassive. I don't see where you're going with this. Really? Kane laid the forensic results in front of him. They found traces of gunpowder on the pen you signed your name with, and blood. That doesn't prove anything. What about this? Holloway switched on the camera footage. You're running from Ava's house at 11 o'clock at night, 5 minutes after the gunshot the neighbor heard. For the first time, concern flashed across Torrance's face. I left earlier, 10 o'clock. No, Mr. Blackwood. You killed her at 11. Then you ran to the gym to create an alibi, called your father. And the next day, your family left the country in a hurry. I want a lawyer. Of course. Holloway leaned back in her chair. But before I do, let me tell you what happens next. We'll check out your phone conversation with your father. We'll question the gym staff. You didn't even change clothes. You just sat in the sauna for an hour. We'll look at all the cameras in the neighborhood. And sooner or later, we'll find out where you bought the gun. Torrance was silent, but his breathing quickened. You know what I'm interested in? Holloway asked suddenly. Why did you carry a gun with you on your date? You planned the murder beforehand, didn't you? No. He raised his voice for the first time. I didn't plan it. I bought it for protection after I robbed my neighbor. And you happened to carry it with you that very night? I always carried it with me. Kane hummed. Even to the gym? Torrance stumbled back, realizing he'd blurted it out. His face was covered in sweat. I loved her, he whispered suddenly. God, I really loved her. She was so beautiful, so smart, so sophisticated. I dreamed of marriage, of children. And then you found out the truth, Holloway said quietly. It was wrong, unnatural, against God. His voice trailed off into a shout. She tricked me, made me fall in love with a man. Ava wasn't a man, Holloway cut him off harshly. She was a woman who loved you and was afraid of losing you. No. Torrance hid his face in his palms. When I realized I couldn't, all those feelings, all those desires, they became dirty, twisted. I had to purify myself. So you pulled out a gun. I don't remember shooting. He spoke quickly now, as if in a hurry to get rid of the words. I only remember her eyes. She looked with such understanding. Even in that moment, she understood me better than I understood myself. What happened then? Panic. I ran to the gym. I knew they kept attendance records there. Called my father. He told me to keep quiet and not sign anything without a lawyer. And the blood and gunpowder on your hands? I was washing my hands in the gym sink. I was in a hurry. All I could think about was creating an alibi. Holloway looked at her watch. Detective Kane, get the stenographer in here. Mr. Blackwood is ready to testify." When Kane came out, Torrance raised haggard eyes to her. "You don't understand. I've been praying every day, asked God to deliver me from these feelings for her. But the more I prayed, the stronger the love became. You know what I realize?" Holloway leaned across the table toward him. "That you didn't kill a person because of faith or principles. You killed her because you chickened out. Because it was easier to pull the trigger than to admit it. Your ideas about love, about God, about life were too narrow for the real world." A stenographer entered the room. Torrance straightened, trying again to put on the mask of control, but it was too late. The mask shattered, exposing what lurked beneath it. A frightened man whose world had crumbled not at the moment of the gunshot, but much earlier, when love proved stronger than prejudice. The Manhattan District Court was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. The courtroom was filled to the brim with journalists, LGBT activists, and simply concerned citizens. The Torrance Blackwood trial was the most high-profile of the year. Holloway sat in the front row, watching the jurors take their seats. 12 people who were to decide the fate of the killer. 7 women, 5 men. Different ages, different races, different social classes. Torrance looked gaunt. His prison robe hung around his slim shoulders. Sitting next to him was his lawyer, Miles Hendricks, known for his ability to get hopeless cases out. Prosecutor Eleanor Duvall rose for her opening statement. Her dark suit and stern glasses gave her a resemblance to the classic schoolteacher. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "in this chamber, we have before us not just a murder. We have before us a hate crime. A crime that has exposed the darkest sides of our society: intolerance, prejudice, religious bigotry." She methodically laid out the evidence before the jury. Gunpowder residue on the handle, camera footage, ballistics results. The defendant claims he acted out of passion, but the facts say otherwise. The purchase of illegal weapons 3 weeks before the murder. An elaborate alibi, an attempt to cover up the crime. These are not the actions of a man out of control. This is a cold-blooded, planned murder. Hendricks countered just as harshly, "My client is a victim of deception. A man whose religious sensibilities have been cynically manipulated. The moment he learned the truth, his world collapsed. Anyone in his shoes could have lost control." Zoe was the prosecution's star witness. She took the stand, clutching a picture of Ava in her hands. She knew she was taking a risk. Zoe's voice shook but remained firm. Every day of her life, she took a risk just by being herself. But Ava believed in love, believed that if a person truly loved, they could accept the truth. "Why didn't she immediately tell the accused about her peculiarity?" Hendricks asked. "Because she saw how he reacted to people like her. His previous remarks, his complaints about his co-workers. She was afraid. And as it turns out, for good reason." Day by day, the story of love and betrayal unfolded. Witnesses replaced each other. Detectives described the investigation. Experts explained technical details. Torrance sat motionless, staring at one point. Only when the last entry from Ava's diary was read did he flinch and cover his face with his hands. On the 7th day of the trial, the jury retired to reach a verdict. Their deliberation lasted 6 hours. "Do you find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you find that the murder was motivated by hate?" "Yes, Your Honor." The sentence, life in prison without parole, was passed in absolute silence. As the hall began to empty, Holloway approached Zoe. "Come with me." They arrived at the Modern Vision Gallery. Nothing had changed here in the intervening months. The same Hawthorne painting on the center wall, a red and black swirl, a dance of shadows. "You know," Zoe said, looking at the painting, "Ava used to say that in art it's not the outer form that matters, but the essence. What's inside? What makes the piece come alive?" "Like people," Holloway replied quietly. They stood at the painting until it was dark outside the windows. Somewhere in the city, the lights were coming on. The same lights that had once inspired this painting. The lights of a big city where every day people love and hate, accept and reject, live and die. "What now?" Zoe asked. "Now?" Holloway looked at the painting. "Now we remember, and hope that one day there won't be any more stories like this." But they both knew this wasn't the end. Somewhere in this town, a new drama was already brewing, a new story of love and hate, and Detective Merritt Holloway would be ready to stand up for justice again, no matter how bitter. The phone rang in her pocket, a new case, new victims, new mysteries, life went on.